We're here to talk film today.
Yes,
And
thank
you've got the report through Amazon. And if you haven't seen the report yet, it is, if you can make, writing a report and lobbying for a report, an action-adventure movie, you all have done that. Talk a little bit about working with Scott Burns.
Yeah, so Scott was, he's been working with Steven Soderbergh for quite a while. He wrote Contagion and he wrote Side Effects, I believe. Yes, he wrote Side Effects. And this was his first film that Soderbergh produced and that he directed. And it's about the investigation into the Bush and Cheney's torture program after 9/11. And it's Dan Jones was a staffer of Dianne Feinstein. He basically headed it up, and quite often it was pretty much it's at times just almost like a one-man show doing it. And it's just it's a very long process of him investigating this. So I got the call about it when it was fairly deep into the game. They pretty much had a final cut. And it's the kind of movie I've always wanted to work on. It's in the vein of like these kind of 70s paranoia thrillers, investigative, like All the President's Men, 3 Days of the Condor. And then,
That's
of course,
exactly what I was thinking about when watching it. And it's the style of the movie and the score.
Yeah, and you don't see those. I don't feel like those kinds of movies are getting made that much anymore. Those are some of my favorite films and some of my favorite scores, like the David Shire scores for The Conversation and All the President's Men again, have all been very inspirational to me. And so I was just when I saw who was making it and who was in it and what it was about, and then I saw a cut. I was so excited to get to do this kind of a film.
Well, so many scenes are set in closed environments. The room where he's mostly working on the computer with the other staffers, in the senator's office. How do you make that exciting from a composing standpoint? Yeah,
that was something that I always loved about a film like All the President's Men. I think Contagion does it too, for sure. With Cliff Martinez, who works with Soderbergh a lot. Is these films of people, essentially, they're films about people exchanging information to one another, and it's mostly talking. And most of the films I work on are actually, like Jeff Nichols is a director I work with a lot. Not a lot of talking in Jeff's movies. There's a lot of room to have some more thematic elements and melody, and this is just a lot of people talking. So, but yes, like you're saying, you're wanting to be on the edge of your seat. You never want to think about the fact that you're just watching a movie that is mostly people talking and exchanging information. And I think it's a matter of this film is so much like I think an overall theme of this film is just about the power and the non-relative nature of truth. Like, and now that we're in the era of alternative facts, like a movie about this is a man just seeking out what happened and being stymied at every turn from basically whoever he's encountering at the time that he's got to go through. And so it's really so much about like Scott's just presenting the simple facts that Dan uncovered, and he's trying to do so in a non-sensationalistic way. So everything is very economical. I feel like the writing is very economical, the acting, the directing. And so it was a job of the music to do the same. Like, we don't need to spruce up these. We don't need to. Scott made it very clear from the beginning. There's not going to be a super heavy dramatic score. We don't want to manipulate, basically, and trying to emotionally manipulate these facts. Like, we're just presenting, Dan's report tells the story. You don't need to necessarily do too much. So it was really my job to give propulsion to this, to feel the gravity of it, it's Dan's story. It's Dan Jones, it's Adam Driver plays him. He's in almost every frame of the film. This music so much of the time was subjective to Dan's psychology as Dan is discovering more and more, kind of going down the rabbit hole of this. And so he's idealistic. He came to Washington to make a difference and to do his job, and then he's kind of fighting that idealism quite a bit when he's being stymied so much, trying to do his job. So a lot of it is about trying to reflect his battle between trying to keep his idealism, keep on the job, and to reflect the determination that he has, while also reflecting the growing seriousness of his findings.
I'm glad you mentioned some of your earlier work. I meant to give you some of those titles. Take Shelter, Mud, Midnight Special. We're hearing your music now on Kidding on Showtime, which is completely different than everything we just mentioned. A lot of your music in the past was more, I would say, more in the acoustic or more of a natural feel. Here it's more synth. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Scott made it pretty clear he did not want like a dramatic orchestral score for this, and he did want it to feel somewhat contemporary and of the moment. And to me, that just it just felt like going a more synth-heavy direction made sense to me. They had put Midnight Special was a film I did that did have fairly synth-heavy, and they liked that music. They attempted some of that into there, so that was part of it. Was just like, okay, well, we can try and go further down that. But it made sense to me just for what Scott wanting it to feel like of the moment, and just to kind of make it. And then also just for it to be, he wanted it. Propulsion was a big part of it. Just to, again, just kind of to the music at times was really just like serving to do exactly what you're saying. We just need to feel like we need to forget that we're just watching people in rooms talking. Let's just try to really feel like there's a real pulse, like we are getting to the bottom of stuff. And so it just felt it made sense to me to have this kind of, it's a somewhat spare but very like insistent kind of synth heavy score.
Well, it was a good choice I did feel like it was more of an action-adventure movie, even though the actions of the movie aren't what you would typically have in an action-adventure movie.
Yeah, and there were certainly still like thematic elements, Scott always knew that he wanted to have some brass to kind of reflect Dan's sense of patriotism. Like the beginning, one of the first scenes of the movie is it's a linear film just following through this. He comes to Washington and kind of have almost like called a fanfare would be a little too much, but to have that feel, and then a little bit like some slight like marching, some snare march, and a little bit of brass with it to kind of, then as the film goes along, that theme kind of deteriorating, running through some more like electronic synthetic elements. There's this piece of gear I got that just makes stuff sound really deteriorated and nasty, and it was called the Sherman filter bank. So running a lot of these things through there that had like started off the movie feeling like brightness and hope, and then kind of slowly just turn the dial on those sounds and make them kind of start reflecting like the nastiness of what he's finding, but also his own psychology. So trying to still approach it in terms of like traditional like thematic elements, but just doing it with more of a synth-heavy feel.
We were talking earlier about cliches of, say, 1400s type movies. Were there any cliches or traps you were trying to avoid on a political, Washington D.C.? Sometimes that music and those types of shows and movies tends to be similar.
I think it was really just about trying to avoid being overly dramatic ever. Just really thinking about the lack of emotional manipulation we're trying to do. Like, I think the whole movie works in that way that if the performances are so strong and the writing is so strong, that I think understating, and the facts are just what they are, and as he's finding them, like if it's just the human element of just looking under these rocks and finding these nasty things. So just letting it speak for itself. So I think that was the main trap we're trying to avoid.
And where will we hear you next?
Season 2 of Kidding, which I'm in the middle of. That comes out next spring. And a documentary I'm going to be starting soon, but I guess hasn't been formally announced yet, so I guess I probably
We
can't
haven't
say
heard
that.
one word about a Barry season 3. I mean, I know that they're going to do a season 3, but
Yes.
I don't think have they even gone in the writer's room or.
I think they're coming up with some ideas. I'm told they're real crazy.
Well, that would apply to Barry, that's for sure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Give us just a second to get the chairs rearranged.